talking about it abstractly, and then in this chapter, it's like, okay, now let's build one of these things. But whereas in my teachings, I go the opposite way. I'm like, okay, first let's just build something just to see, how it works, and then we'll start talking about what additional things it can do and when you would do certain things versus other things. I like to be able to get the people down and dirty right away, and that this chapter starts off with the down and dirty, which I like.
I, I think like many, I learned best by failing. And once I'll just try it out and get a couple of failures, and then start mental mapping those failures to the content of a book or something. It's
Yeah.
much more memorable.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with, I don't know about all products, but I mean, I was grateful for the step-by-step for this one because it's too daunting of a product. Like I realize that you guys are developers, and so you open up Visual Studio and you get comfortable. You're like, I know what all this stuff is. But the people who write SSIS packages, they don't use Visual Studio. So I don't know if you can even go back to when you were brand new with this tool, but there's a lot going on right here. And if all you want to do is grab data from one place and do a couple of things to it really quickly and then put it someplace else, where do you start? And
Yeah, it doesn't have a very intuitive, like, in years past, Microsoft would have a wizard for that sort of thing. And I think they still do, right? They still have a
yeah,
wizard for
they do.
this.
And it will build this for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really the starting point. And the question is how you find the wizard, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought I liked the step by step here. I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
and I think it just starts making this more accessible immediately. You just start feeling like, oh, I know how to navigate around here. It's not so bad.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me, is the similarities between SSIS and Windows Workflow Foundation. I know that's like really a developer-y type technology, and even a rare number of developers actually utilize it. And I was surprised to learn that SSIS does not use workflow in any way.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So it's completely different system that does almost an identical set of functions. It's one of the things that's wrong with corporations, big ones especially, is that they even have something like that. Can you imagine how difficult it was to build SSIS and how many developer resources and how much cost went into that? And
Well,
then
and
they
how well
had
you'd have to know
another.
XML.
I'm sorry?
I was just making a snarky comment about how well you'd have to know XML.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then again, to do it, like 6 months later in a different part of the organization, when Windows Workflow came out. I thought that was just craziness, you know. So
Do you
this
think
came
that?
out in
Do you think?
2005, right? When Windows 2.0, I'm sorry, when .NET 2.0 came out,
Yeah, SQL Server
and then
2005, yeah.
Workflow came out in 3.0. So that was, like, I think it was 1 year later that it released,
Yeah.
and the similarities are just astounding. The drag and drop and the control flow and the properties and variables and all this stuff is like identical.
Yeah. The main difference I would say is this data flow tab right here. This is the true power of SSIS on this tab. And the reason why it's so powerful is because of the parallelism. Like I kind of explain it like this. And this is where I think when people write their own ETL tool, they get hung up because if you're going to write your own ETL tool, you're going to do like three things, right? You're going to grab a bunch of data, then you're going to mess with it, and then you're going to load it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially what you're doing. And then people go into SSIS, and either because the tool's too complicated or they just think it's easier to do it by hand, they say, well, I'm going to write my own and transact SQL using stored procedures. And I see it a lot. I see a lot of people just choose to write their own. And the problem with it is kind of one of memory management. Like, if I'm going to go grab a bunch of data, what is that, like 1,000,000 rows, 2,000,000 rows, 500 million rows, whatever it is. Let's just say it's 1,000,000 rows, right? I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait while I load up all that data. And then once all that data is loaded, then I'm going to try to mess with it. Either I'm going to like loop through it, or I'm going to start, loading it into a temporary table where I can play with it in a central place. And then once I clean it, then I'm going to load it into the destination system. Now, the problem is when you grab a bunch of data, you're probably grabbing it from a data source that's already pretty busy, right? That's probably why you're getting the data, is because they didn't want to do whatever you want to do with that data in the source, right? So you've got this super busy OLTP system, and it's too busy to really answer you. And so as you load your 1,000,000 rows, you're going to wait a long time. And then once you wait, and then you mess with it, and then you load it, you might be loading it into a pretty busy data warehouse. So the problem is there's a lot of waiting in between these steps. And then what I think distinguishes SSIS from like workflow or anything else is this data flow pipeline. The pipeline says, well, we're going to have buffers that we're going to load up. And so we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, load up our buffers, play with all the data, and then deliver it. And then we're going to, do it again. We're going to keep kind of keeping up these buffers filled with data flowing through SSIS all the time. So there's really not this like, let's wait to load 1,000,000 rows while we do nothing, in the meantime. You're always working with the data a little at a time as it kind of flows through the entire process. So that's like the true, I know that was a long-winded explanation, but that's the true power of this tab, this data flow tab, that makes this product very unique.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you could do the same thing in workflow, because workflow is parallelizable by default. I mean, it utilizes parallel execution by default, and you just have to have tasks that basically start reading and do one at a time, basically, for each row that you read out, go ahead and do something with it. But as you were talking about that, there's another developer-centric tool called the Data Flow Parallel Library or something like that. Hold on, let me look it up real quick. But that tool actually does exactly what you're talking about. You give it a level of concurrency, and it will keep the buffers full and keep the data moving through the system. It's used for like video encoding and image processing and things like that. So you'll have a step that basically says load up the image, and then go ahead and turn it to black and white, or rotate it, or apply red eye filtering to it, or whatever. And each step along the pipeline, and then you get some sort of end result at the end. Let's see. So data flow.
I think it's worth noting though, like Ike, you and I are probably very familiar with data flow because we've taken years off our life playing with it and debugging it. But if I'm someone starting off and I come into data flow, say I have an existing stored procedure that works, yeah, it's slow, and it may not be the best, but I think, oh, let me try this data flow, and it just turns, data source turns red the first time. What do you do?
The data flow turns red the first time.
Right. So you plug in something into data source, you hit play, it turns red. What do you do next?
Well, I could probably make this thing turn red, right? Like,
you see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah. I can see that it's daunting to troubleshoot, right?
Well, yeah. When my stored procedure breaks, I'll typically get some sort of error message, and it's right there. I can grab it. SQL is a very almost lots of people know SQL. It's very easy to troubleshoot or get help from someone else. when this thing turns red, I'm trying to remember back the first time I saw it turn red. I was like, well, what do I do? Or when it's deployed and it says it's the package is broken, what do I do? Why won't it deploy? What's this key issue that it's talking about? Things like that.
Yeah, but
And
I
I think
think that's true in
that's why you see some
everything.
people say, I don't like this. This is hard. I'm just going to go back to my stored procedure.
Right. But I think you have that with a lot of things, right? Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, I agree.
I mean, you had, first of all, I disagree that store procedure error messaging is all that clear, right? I mean, sometimes it just says there's a problem with line one, and line one is 50 lines long,
Hmm.
and you have no idea what you did wrong. So
Yes,
I think
that's
we got
that's
used to
technically
that pain, but
that's technically accurate if we're all starting, from ground one.
yeah.
But typically, you have a lot more SQL experiences before you start coming into data flow tasks and SSIS. Typically, so
So
um, you,
my sales pitch for SSIS is that I can outperform a store procedure every time. Like, I, I mean, I realize that it might not be the perfect tool, but it is free and it is very fast. And the other thing is, here's the main problem with the store procedure, Rob, is it's in your database. It's coupled with your database. So if you have a need to move ETL and scale it out a little bit, there's no way to do that, right? You're not moving that store procedure anywhere. It's tightly coupled with everything that it's touching in the database. But SSIS is automatically decoupled from all the data it's touching. So you could put it on its own server, you can give it its own memory. In fact, there are ETL frameworks out there that if it doesn't know the load it's getting, like let's say that you could have anywhere between 1 million and 100 million records depending on the weather for the day, right? If that's true, there are ETL frameworks that will take SSIS and just start throwing it up on other servers and spreading it out and spreading out the workload, so that all these servers get involved and they move the data, across like 5 or 6 different servers. So, I mean, you can't do that in a store procedure. There's no way to do that.
well, you start playing Cirque du Soleil with linked servers.
Yeah, that's a disaster. So, yeah, I think, and there's no way to like automatically do it so that that decision is based on load, where you're or you're writing all that by hand. I mean, it's just the wrong place to do it. So yeah, I think SSIS is compelling to learn. I'm a believer in it. I use it all the time. Uh-oh, did I silence you guys?
No, no, no.
Scott, do you want to claim you're a believer?
No, I'm not a believer, but again, I don't do a lot of this on a daily basis. Like I so you've acknowledged the fact that it is a tough tool to. It's a big learning curve, right? And obviously, you'd only want to climb over that curve if you are going to be doing a lot of ETLing. And my, you know, I've done some ETLing before, I think twice in my 10, 15 years, working in companies. So, at that time, SSIS probably, well, it may have been there the last time I did some, but it certainly wasn't there the time before I did some. So, I wouldn't have even bothered with the tool. Um, I probably would have hand rolled something to just, with the stored procedures that I had currently.
Yeah.
So which way is the right way?
Well, again, I think it depends on how much you're using. Like how much ETLing are you doing? Like, is this one data mart of, 4,000 that you're going to be doing? You're a data mart consultant type. Then absolutely you would, spend a lot of time learning the tool, getting the ins and outs. If you're working for a company and they have a one-off project where there's a couple of data marts there, I don't know. Is it worth learning? I don't know. But somewhere in there is the line, and if you're using it often enough, it certainly makes sense to utilize.
Hey, Ike, if I'm So I'm starting my new company, and we're all in Azure. How do we deploy SSIS and cubes to Azure? So see,
Well,
if it's, I see Azure pumped a lot to me as the enterprise solution.
yeah, just a VM. I mean, it's it's kind
He
of
had a
Are,
section
are
on
you
that.
acting like I'm throwing a loaded question at you?
yeah, you're throwing a loaded question at me. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of frustrating to the guys because like Azure is now a partner and supports JasperSoft, which is the open source BI platform, and it doesn't support the Microsoft BI stack yet. So it's it's basically using virtual machines.
To me,
So he did have a section on that, like 301, I think, in the book, on putting it into production and creating a catalog and stuff like that, right?
Well, that was, you mean the
it's not Azure.
SSIS
It's
catalog?
just
Yeah, that's not
No, it's not.
Azure.
It's not Azure. No, no, no. But Ike's answer was using a VM, so it doesn't have to be Azure. It's just onto a different server is really.
Yeah.
personally for me when SSIS launched in 2005. I wasn't a believer. I thought DTS was still way too easy, and 2000 and SSIS in 2005 was way too new. But I think in 2008 and the 2008 R2, I became just an absolute huge believer in SSIS.
Yeah. So yeah, me too. So Scott, that what he was talking about there is actually really useful. So I wanted to kind of show you that. Um, so when he talked about deploying to production, he talked about creating an integration services catalog. Which, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's this thing right here, and And the way you create it is you just right click and click create catalog and it creates the catalog. This is all new to SQL Server 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So before 2012, we had to use configuration files and they were like impossible to manage and to figure out where they were and to not overwrite. And it was like a web config in Hassel. And the problem with it is like, if you're in development, that means you're going to development servers and development source servers into development data warehouse and development cubes and everything's development. And the problem with SSIS is that like this connection, it's embedded, right? This thing, localhost right here, this is embedded,
Hmm.
right? And so if I'm in development and I've got like 15 connections and then I go to production, am I going to come in here by hand and like change all 15 every single time I want to deploy? Like that's a nightmare, right? So they had configuration files to get around that. And those worked, but it was like web config. Web config's fine, but if you have different settings from dev to production, it can be a hassle. Like you have to spend some time and make sure you don't overwrite those things, right? And we know because we go into all sorts of companies where they failed to do that, that it must not be that easy, right? Because people don't do it a lot or they don't do it correctly.
Yeah.
So
Most people don't take. I mean, the proper way to do it is a web config transform, and most people don't take the time to do that. They instead will deploy and then fix it manually by hand, which is stupid.
right, and that's similar that they were doing in SSIS, which was stupid. So,
Yeah.
so the answer to this is pretty cool, and like I said, all brand new. This integration services catalog. So if this is the catalog, and if I go into my project, you can see that I've got. Let me just make this wider so you can see. I've got a project here, and inside the project I have packages, and like if I right click on the package and click configure, I have access to my connections. Like I'm not a developer at this point. Like I develop in Visual Studio, but I deploy in SQL Server Management Studio, and I could just be a regular guy, and I could say, "Oh, wait, this connection string is wrong, and I need to fix it. I need to edit the value and make it something else, or the catalog, the database name is wrong, or the credentials are wrong, or the server name is wrong, and I can edit it and make it something else." And so what that lets me do is deploy all my packages and then change all my connection strings. And then I can deploy my packages over it and not overwrite my custom, names that I had on that server.
That's really nice.
Um, it is really nice, and not only that, but you can share it for the entire project. So packages, real SSIS installations get this package sprawl, where they almost create a package for every table or every few tables or every logical section of the data warehouse or every data source or whatever it is. But I've gone into sites where there's several hundred packages, and if they all have their own connections, that's a lot to manage. But you can consolidate them into a project, and then in the entire project, you can say, hey, I need to change this to a production server. I'm going to change this parameter to production server, and I'm going to have all of those packages use that parameter. And then there's one other thing you can do.
Wait a minute, before you leave that one.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit confused. So I deploy all my packages. They each have custom connection strings. Now, how does when you're changing it at the project level, how does it know to change the connection strings at the individual level?
Well, I kind of spoke quickly over that because I didn't want you to ask, but no, that's okay. I'm just kidding. So what you can do is you can set up using parameters for things like your connection string. So right here, this guy right here, you can say, instead of using a connection string, use this, which is a parameter right here. So I don't have any set up to kind of show you this, but this parameter, once I parameterize it, now I can get a hold of it going into the project.
Okay, so that makes sense. And then how would you link that parameter with the connection string? Like, okay, now you have a parameter which is a string. It has a name of value, or has the name of parameter. And then how do you say from this connection string use that parameter? Is it like a $sign or an @ or one of those things?
Yeah. So
so you set connection string here to like a local host or something that's true. This is what I used to do all the time. It's just a poor man's hack. But you leave connection string to something you know will always be true.
So under here, under expressions, you can say, take my connection string, or take, if that was server name, yeah. Oh, I see catalog. I don't see server name, but here's my connection string, and then I click this ellipsis button, and then I build the connection string here. And if you scroll down here, you can see that project parameter that I just created.
Okay.
So you just kind of build it and then concatenate that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, non-intuitive. But I mean, it's good. It's good that you can do it at least.
I would have loved to have that. Because I always had to start a lot of my larger scale packages by an initial step that set all my different variables for all my different connection strings, override them, and then go into the main package.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool. In fact, there's another feature of this that's pretty cool too, and that's this thing called an environment. So bear with me for a second, but imagine that I have multiple environments, because maybe I have like a UAT, like user acceptance testing. So I can even do that here. I can say, here's my UAT environment, and then click OK. And now I've got a little environment there, and I can there we go. I can create a variable here. I can say something like, here's my server name. And it's a string, and this is my UAT main server or something. I'm just making stuff up, right? But the point is, I've got a variable, I've got a variable value. And then if I go back into the package, excuse me, and configure it, actually, you know what, it is not configure. Here it is. So I go back, I go to my project, and I can reference that environment, and I can say, please use UAT, and then click OK. And then I can go into that server name variable that you saw earlier, and I can say, I want you to use that environment variable server name here. So it thinks it's just server name coming out of the environment, but we know that I set it up to be my UAT main server, and that's what's going to pour into there. So
Mm-hmm.
you might look at this and think, well, why would I go through all this trouble setting this up? But imagine I have a UAT environment, I have a testing environment, I have a production environment, and now I can just change which one this project is using for all the packages underneath it. Like I don't have to, it's just on references. So I
Yeah.
can say, use this one, now use this one, now use this one. And it's a way of like either having different testing environments or like setting up things that might be transitory in nature. Like imagine you're pulling from an accounting system during the month, and then once the month closes, you're pulling from a data warehouse. So you can say, well, month's not closed yet, we pull here, and then boom, we pull someplace else. And you just can change where all your packages are pulling all at once automatically. And like
That
I
makes
said,
sense to me.
cool. Yeah, that's all new and it's pretty useful.
So I saw that the book actually had associating properties like you were talking about, but it didn't have that environment thing. So that's something that wasn't in the book. Oh no, it is. I'm sorry. Create environment. Yeah, it is in there. I don't know how I missed that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the book does talk about a lot of this, and when we do what we do, we like emphasize and say, hey, when the book talked about this, that's actually really cool. Like
Yeah,
before we had this, it was a huge pain to do that. Um,
yeah, yeah. That's pretty cool.
yeah. Um, so what else can I tell you that? I mean, the other thing is like I realize that you guys think that SSIS has a steep learning curve, but like there are some things about it that I just love, right? Like I love that you could just click on anything in your control flow and set a breakpoint, right? You can just say, hey, on pre-execute, break this thing, and then you have all the things that you would normally have with the breakpoint, right? You have a locals window and a watch window, and can inspect variables and parameters, and
Yeah, that's very similar to workflow. The so I didn't that wasn't novel or new to me or whatever. Um, it's not quite as powerful. It doesn't look like anyway as you know the breakpoints and the error point. I'm sorry, the checkpoints and whatever that you can do inside of Visual Studio, but I'm not 100% positive there. I was just looking at the on error, and it was like you can breakpoint on error, or you can breakpoint, when it's happened a number of times,
yeah.
but there were
So
no like expression as far as I could tell.
right, so you can say, make it the hit count equal or greater than 5, right? So yeah, not really an expression, but this would be like, I know
Yeah.
I've got
So
a
what I
problem
was
on the
what I was
millionth time this thing executes, and I don't want to sit here and hit F5 a million times.
yeah, but if your rows are always in order, which I guess if you add an order by clause, that's probably okay. But I would be worried. Like what I really wanted to say there was something like, when the value coming in contains a, you know, something that like I hit an error the first time, and I want to know, you know, I want to run it again, but I want to stop when that error is stop further up the pipeline when that error is happening to inspect something, right? So that's where I would use like when the value coming in is X, go ahead and I want to break, so I
The
can look at
problem, the problem though is this, like, I mean, when you're debugging C# in Visual Studio, it's much different than like when you're doing a massive 10 million row bulk loader.
Yeah, I know,
When you're bulk
absolutely.
loading, batches of 40, 50,000, you can't like it can't inspect every element.
Right, yeah,
So
that's
they're
what I was
kind of
saying.
different
I
beasts.
want this
Every
particular
for every
value
row,
break
press
only.
F11 to continue.
yeah. Break only when this particular value is coming in. That's what I was looking for. I was imagining this would be an absolute pain in the ass. Break on error. Okay, well, go, 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 go. Like I just think that would be kind of unmanageable.
So there is a way to do that, but it's not really fun.
Well,
So
just approach. When I'm doing a bulk load or everything, I'm usually going into a staging table, and I don't want to inspect everything coming in right away. I want to get the data in and terminate whatever external dependency I have, and
yeah,
then analyze it.
yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, that I don't know why that reminded me of this, but I don't know if they talked about this in the book. But one of the cool features of SSIS is the data viewer.
Yeah, they talked about it. Data views. Yeah,
Did you get a chance to play with it?
a little bit.
Because you just you just play, and then as it
Yeah,
grabs
and
data from
then
the source, it
It pulls like a
stops, it
20% type
breaks, it
thing.
stops. Yeah. So maybe I don't have any data I'm moving. I don't know. I just kind of picked this package randomly because I was playing earlier. So okay, I'm going to order details, and where am I going to? I'm going to test ETL. Do I have any mappings? I do. So this should work. I don't know why I'm not getting any data viewer. So execute
well,
map.
doesn't it? It was saying in the
Oh,
book
I
that it
had a
stops
break.
like.
I had a break. That's why. Hang on. There it is. So yeah, it stops when the buffers are filled and just shows you what's in the buffer.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
pretty cool.
so yeah, it is. And then you have a little play button here, so you can kind of like see your buffer, kind of look at this, and if you want, you can copy the data and then put it into Excel, right? And examine it in Excel if you want to, where you can do all sorts of cool stuff, right? Like you've got all the sums and counts and averages and all your Excel math and everything if you want to see that you're doing the math okay or you're giving the data you expect. And all the other stuff that you have too, like filtering and sorting and things like that. So that's a good way to kind of inspect, a terrible amount of data that you don't want to have to break through. Um, yeah, and just hit play and then get the next batch and look at the next batch, right? Um, so yeah, that data viewer is like super useful. The other thing I liked about this, by the way, is when he said for colorblind people, go to options and add the colorblind. Um, yeah, I just thought that was really cool, actually. Let me stop. I think it's where did he say it was? That was in. I have to look it up. I don't remember where he said that was.
Hold on, I can look it up real quick. Yeah.
Um, but I
You could
imagine
probably
it's in
beat me because you have an
options.
electronic company.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
Precedence arrows
it's right here.
140.
Yeah,
Oh,
show precedent constraint labels right here under
yeah.
accessibility. So yeah, I like these. Colorblind red and green is a terrible colors for colorblindness, right? And they're all over all these types of designers.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem is it's just a cultural convention that green is good and red is bad. Like they wanted to make it intuitive, for people that are not colorblind, and then they had an issue because
Yeah,
those were the two worst colors to use. Yeah.
yeah. So, should we move on to chapter 9? Because we've only got a
Sure.
few minutes
I was
left.
just about to suggest that.
Okay, cool. So, um, chapter 9 starts talking about cubes, and I wanted to say to anybody who might be listening to us, I don't know if anybody's actually listening to us, but if they are, if they're confused about cubes, that is totally normal. So I think cubes and the and all the vocabulary that has to go along with it, it's just something that you have to kind of do for a very long time until it clicks, because there's a lot to it, and we don't really think in cubes the way Microsoft's asking us to think like this, and it's just a challenge. So for anybody who's doing it, I would just say hang in there and keep doing it, and it'll click eventually. It might just take a little while.
When I was looking over some of the stuff in Chapter 9, I had an incredibly hard time. Um, I kept wanting to do it in relational transact SQL in my head rather than letting go and trying to accepting the cube way.
Yeah, what's like the first rule of data normalization? Yeah, what's the first rule?
Don't repeat yourself.
Yeah, the dry principle, right? And in BI, we say absolutely repeat yourself as often as possible, right? Like in cubes and in data warehouses, we want to repeat ourselves all the freaking time. I mean, that's what we want to do. And you think, wait a minute, that's so opposite what we know. Well, why don't we repeat ourselves in transactional stuff? Like, why do we have this rule to begin with? Because I
So
think
when you make an update, you only have to make it in one place.
Okay,
but the key is update.
Right, exactly. Right. So if you make an update, you only have to make it in one place. And if you do make an update and you only make it in one place, you're doing it for a couple of reasons. You're doing it to save space on the disk, right? And you're doing it to avoid data integrity problems, right? Because if we have 15 places to change somebody's address and we only change 14 of them, now we have conflicting data. That doesn't make any sense, right? And this is an important principle in transactional systems. But in BI, Scott, you already have it, right? Which is update. Continue with your thought.
Well, I was just saying in OLTP, you're updating, but in BI, what you're really doing is reporting. You're doing reading. You're looking at data more than you are changing it.
Right. And in fact, you're hardly ever changing it. And
Exactly.
If you are changing it, you're a developer, probably. Right?
Yeah.
So
you're really just dumping. You're adding. You're not updating.
Right. So it's really helpful if you go in Excel, because fundamentally, the BI platform is not a replacement to the transactional platform. And so, Rob, what you were saying earlier, I keep trying to go back to my transactional background and my normalization background and do this in Transact SQL. And the people who work with this, they don't care about your Transact system, right? They care about Excel. And they were frustrated with Excel. And so they built these tools to augment Excel. I mean, really, if you think about all these tools from that perspective, it becomes a lot easier to work with, because nobody who works with Excel cares about dry, because they know they're in charge of their own updates. So they might have like a date field here, right, where they're like 7/1/2013. And if they need a date field here, they just create it like that easy, right? And if they need one on 15 other sheets, they don't think twice about recreating what I just did on 15 other sheets, right? They never think about it at all because of how easy it is. And if they make a mistake with the data, they can just go and easily correct it. And that's the same thing in analysis services and in data warehousing is we're not afraid to repeat ourselves. If we need to repeat a customer name, Scott Reed buys 15 things, then we want to embed his name in all 15 places, because we don't want to have to look it up. We don't want to have to go figure out who this person is. The other thing to remember, and this is, let me actually bring something up. I didn't plan on lecturing today. I apologize. But the other thing to remember is that On your transactional system, you're you're the developer and you're going to hide all the intricacies from the users. But in a data warehouse and in a cube, we want our users using the data directly. And I know that sounds weird because we spend a lot of our lives not having users on a database, right? If I said, hey, can I put all my users, give them direct access to your data, Rob? You'd be like, what are you, crazy? Like, absolutely not. You cannot do that. But in a data warehouse, you're like, yeah, I want the users browsing the data and playing with the data and thinking about it. And users don't like it when you have 300 tables, which is why, like in a really good data warehouse, you wouldn't really have more than 30 tables. And really, you'd want to keep it around 10 or so. Because any more than that, and they get confused, they can't find what they're looking for. So you're really trying to make the data marts and the cubes as simple as possible so that users can find answers to their own questions. Um, and I think that when people bring their transactional background and baggage into the BI world, they really are hindering themselves because they're looking at it. Their basic assumptions of how the system is used are wrong. Like, we're creating user tools with user schema. And then when you realize we're attacking the problem from the user perspective, then it makes sense to never obey the dry principle, right? It makes sense to repeat yourself because you wouldn't want to tell a user to go look something up someplace else. So
I get it. It's just not that easy to do.
yeah. Well, I mean, so this is a cube browser right here. It's a really, really terrible one because it's embedded in Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, it's just a bad one. So if I drag order count here and drop it, and then I go to like maybe my order date, and I say, give it to me by like calendar year, and I drop it, right? So this is what users do. Like, I'm not acting like a developer here. I'm acting like a user. And if I say, oh, okay, that's interesting that I can do it by year, but I want to do it by like city too. So let's add that too. And now I can see all the cities that placed orders in 2005. Or I can change the order here. And I can say, give me what Valor did in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008. So it's really helpful, I think, to remember that this is our destination. Like, we're creating tools that can do this. And even in Excel, where I like go to my data tab, let me go to a new sheet here, not confuse it, and I say, hey, I want to get it from Analysis Services, and it's my local host, and let's wait around a while, and let's go up to the AdventureWorks cube and click Finish, and I want a pivot table. And I can do the same thing that you just saw me do in Visual Studio, but I can just do it in Excel and say, okay, here it is here's my internet order count, and then I want it based on date. And I can just take the whole date hierarchy and put it under rows, and I can see the same numbers, right? These are the same numbers you just saw in Visual Studio, only I can, in this tool, because it's a better cube browser, I can expand it, go all the way down to the day and see my order count by day, right? And then also, because it's a better tool, I can go to the geography that you saw earlier and like, let's do country, because country is probably a little bit easier, and just make that the columns. And so now in 2 seconds, I'm looking at my annual sales by country, by time, and it's expandable, right? If I want to blow up France, I can see it, all the French cities, and I can see how they're ordering. And if I wanted to analyze products or product line or salespeople or any of that, this is what this is where we're headed, right? This is why we're doing everything we're doing in this chapter. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
That was pretty cool. I actually hadn't seen the Power Pivot through Excel demoed before, so that's pretty cool. I like that.
cool, good. Yeah, there's a lot we can do
So
with it.
so you always there are a couple of interesting things about your workflow there. You're always dragging out the like I don't know how you say it, but the most rolled up part of the dimension and drilling down.
No, no, I'm
Do you
not.
ever start with yeah, well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you
Yeah,
ever
no, no,
start
no,
with
no.
like month and then you roll up? Does it support that?
I start with whatever the guy who signs my check tells me to start with. So
Yeah, right, of course.
so
But
this
like,
is this is all driven by the person who says, I want to see our internet sales by country and by month for 2013.
yeah,
You
so
know,
do the month one real quick. Can you I just want to see the,
so if I wanted to do month, I would take the whole hierarchy out and I would come here and I would say put month there. And then, oh, you know what? So um, let's see. Do I have month as its own attribute? Yeah, I'd have to like, no. Let me figure out where you're headed before I show off. Okay, go ahead.
well, I was curious to see, like this is all drill down. I was curious to see a roll up scenario where I want to start with the most, I don't know, broken out data, or I don't know how to say that properly, but the most granular data, and then I would want to coarsify it. Like I just wanted to see what that would look like. Of
Um,
course, inventing new words left and right here.
right, right,
Coarsify.
right,
That's
right.
that's fun.
So a lot of this is like I have to set up. Um, let's see. So like, okay, here's it
Sounds
by
like a very abnormal consumption pattern.
here it is
There
by
you go.
date, right? So, or if you wanted it by month of year, we could just drag month of year down.
Then click Coursify.
What's that?
Then you click Coursify.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. So now, how do you roll up?
You
That's
mean
perfect. That's what I would want to start um, by seeing, and then well, I would expect we're dealing with multi-year, so I'd expect January through December would be repeated multiple times. But and then I
so?
was curious how that would look like to roll it up.
So
But
I
maybe
could
it's not possible in this tool. I don't know. I mean, maybe you just
like that.
interesting. Okay, so it's naturally rolled up for you. Okay, I get it. I get it. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Okay, so this is what he's talking about when he says this is pre-aggregate data, right? Because this kind of math in Transact SQL would be very slow, right? How many rows am I scanning? Millions of rows, right? Potentially millions of rows. And so what we're doing with analysis services is we're saying it's not rocket science. We know what math they're going to ask us to do. Let's do it before they ask us. And that way, when they design these screens and they get this instant response that you're seeing, right? This is all black magic. This is the black magic of analysis services where we're asking a question and getting the answer in a second. Well, the answer was calculated last night when the cube was processed.
Cool.
Um,
So there are a couple of other. I don't know if we have to wrap up now or not, but there was some interest. Like there's some things in here that I had never heard of before, like many to many dimensions and like role-playing dimensions and how slowly changing dimensions work. And that seems like some of the real rocket science. That was the first like stuff where I was like, whoa, that's that's some heavy. That's going to take some grokking. Like
Yeah.
it's not just a read and get. It was a um, wow. Um, that's probably where BI, people make their money, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. And it's a lot of vocabulary, that where you just get comfortable with it. Like the one thing I did complain about is this when he talked about parent-child dimensions here, this, and then when he talked about, um, let's see, fact dimensions here, which they called degenerate dimensions. I think he even mentioned it was called degenerate dimension. Yeah, right here he said they are also known in the biz as degenerate dimensions, right? So I would say like never do this. No, that's not true. I wouldn't say never do it. But when you have like a fact dimension, what makes analysis services go really slow in processing is when dimensions get a lot of members in it. So you typically don't want, you want big fact tables. You want fact tables, if you're tracking internet orders, you want every order, right? You want millions of orders coming through. But if you have a dimension that you're going to slice and dice, I mean, if we go back to Excel here for a second, um, that's a dimension, right? We're slicing by year and date. Well, there's only 365 per year, and we're doing 5 years. We're dealing with 1,500, 2,000 records, right? That's not terrible. Like we can handle that. And if we're dealing with cities in the world, there's only so many cities, right? 194 countries. Every country has a couple thousand cities we care about. We're talking about 100,000 cities, maybe, right? Maybe more. But the point is, it's not 50 million. And when you have dimensions that are in your fact table, you've now made a dimension at the same granularity as the fact table. And if the fact table has 50 million records, you could have a dimension like popularly they put like invoice number there and they make a dimension on invoice number. And there's no sure way to make analysis services tank in processing performance than doing something like that. So it's good. You can do it if your total little data mart is really small, um, then it's fine. But if it's going to have any type of size at all, it's not good. Um, and then it's the same with this like parent-child dimension, these self-referencing dimensions. They, if they're large, they can be kind of a performance problem and kind of difficult to debug, but it's okay if they're small. Um, yeah, so I guess we only have 3 minutes left. I'm kind of surprised because we didn't even talk about slowly changing dimensions, which are actually really, really popular. Type 2 SCDs, did you guys feel like you understood that?
I felt a lot more comfortable in chapter 8.
Yeah, that was the part where I was. Yeah, yeah. That was the part where I was like, okay, like it was getting really complicated, and I was
I was
running out of
planning on
time, so
leaning on
I switched.
Ike and Brad for this part of the book.
Right.
Yeah, I don't even know
Well,
if Brad would have been any help either here.
so
He's
so like I don't have like a good SCD here. Maybe I should do that for next time. I should show you a type 2. But the example that he uses in the book is kind of a popular example, and that's like when an employee changes department. So like this employee department here. So
Do
if
you think we should plan on like the first 10 minutes of next meeting just rehashing this a bit?
yeah, I think we can. Yeah, I think we can. If we've got to close up, which kind of brings me to the next thing, which is what should we talk about next week? So um, we want to talk about SCDs, and then we're going to do chapter 10, obviously, um, and then we can do chapter 11 MDX and chapter 12 MDX, I think. Yeah, that's a good. If we could do 10, 11, and 12, is that too much? Does somebody have the paper copy of the book?
Yeah, I have the paper copy.
Looking.
10, 11, and 12 would be going from, this is page 362
Yeah.
to
Five.
497.
Holy
Yeah,
cow.
basically 500. So about 150 pages.
Do you think that's too much to read in a month, or?
I don't know. It depends on how heavy it is, and I can't tell that by looking at like, I would say, I read chapter 9 fine until I got to the slowly changing dimensions. And then I went from breezing through to slow crawl. So I don't know if it's what the content is like in here. Ike, you'd probably be the only person that could eyeball it.
Well,
I mean,
here's the thing about
MDX queries
so
and
Chapter 12 looks incredibly fast to read.
yeah. So
well,
let me tell you about MDX for a second. First of all, it's the guy who designed it left Microsoft, Moshe, so he now works for Google. Um, and I don't really think they're doing any changes to it. Like it's pretty static, but it is an entirely new language. And so, why don't we plan on doing this next week? Because we're going to talk about a language that only I know.
next month.
Next month, I mean, yeah, yeah. Next month, we're going to talk about a language that only I write in. So, so maybe we'll start off by talking about slowly changing dimensions, and I'll show you an example of one, and then I'll walk you through like a way to quickly learn MDX so that you can get the basics done.
Just to throw out another option,
Yeah,
chapter 10, bells and whistles, in when we do TIG, these are chapters that we generally skip.
yeah, yeah. That is another
Um,
option.
that's something we could do
What
if that's
about,
not like an important part of the book, we can maybe skip that one and
do you
then
think we
go
could
to.
do the first 30 minutes of next month on just chapters 9 and 10? Or 20 minutes and then go into MDX for the rest of the session? Just skimming, I, I think chapters 11 and 12 look fun. But
Okay, all
I'm
right.
going to reread 9 again, which is going to be painfully slow. And 10, I don't know how fast that's going to be either.
Okay, so
Well,
we'll
yeah,
spend.
I'm wondering as to the usefulness of 10.
It's pretty useful.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty useful. Okay, two things in there are pretty useful, but I agree with you, Rob, that we'll go quickly and then we'll get to MDX and we'll spend most of our time in MDX.
Okay, so 10, 11, and 12. We'll do a slowly changing dimension, and then 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah, yep.
Okay,
All right, thanks, guys. I enjoyed it like always.
yeah, that was fun. All right.
All right, talk to you guys later.
Thanks, Ike. Thanks, everyone.
Yep.